Okay, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan is actually a collection of 16 stories. Now, these stories have been kind of subdivided into 4 sections. Okay, and each section basically centers around an emotional theme. Okay, and each section also begins with somewhat a parable, like a story with a meaning to to send across a particular point. Okay, so but in this video I will only focus on the first section. Okay, the title is Feathers from 1,000 Li. Now I am thinking that I'm just assuming that Li here means it's a way to measure distance. Okay, and I'm thinking it's what it basically means is a feather from a faraway place. Okay, so anyway, this section, okay, what we can gather, the theme would most likely be about sacrifice. Okay, the giving up of oneself. So yeah, so anyway, let's get started with the first section. Okay, so now the parable, okay, that it begins with is about a lady. She remembers buying a swan, okay, in Shanghai, and she says it's for a very foolish price. She says because the market vendor told her that it's a very special duck that it kind of stretched its neck out too much, and so now it looks like a swan, and now it's too beautiful to eat, and so well, she thought it was really fascinating, and she bought it because it was special. Yeah, and she paid a lot of money for it. Okay, so anyway, when the time came and she had to leave China for America, among all the other precious things that she packed up to take with her was this swan. All right. Now, for her to actually bring something like that with her, it must have meant a lot. It must have meant a great deal to her for her to take the trouble to bring it with her. Now let's look at this swan. Okay, you see, the market vendor said it was once a duck that stretched its neck in hopes of becoming a goose. I don't know, but I can see that this it could possibly symbolize a certain hope for herself, a transformation somewhat. Okay, a duck turning into a swan, and it was probably something that she hoped for. Okay, a certain kind of transformation now that she was going to America. She obviously hoped for something to happen, something great to happen. We've all heard of the American dream and how it's a land of opportunity, and I suppose this is what she wanted to see. And so anyway, she continues and she says, in America I will have a daughter just like me, she says. And she wants to she wants a different kind of life for her daughter, not something that she experienced. Okay, she says, I will have a daughter, but over there nobody will say her worth is measured by the loudness of her husband's belch. Over there people will look down. People won't look down on her because she will speak perfect American English. You see, she has all these very high hopes. What she wants to see, what she wants to live when she goes to America. So I think this duck could have symbolized her hopes. All right. So anyway, let's look at this lady. So she brings this duck with her, and it somewhat represents also her past, okay, where she came from. And where she came from, it was a whole new world. It's a whole different world, rather. Things were so different. It wasn't what she was going to experience here. Now, when she left China, things were not very nice. There was the threat from the communists, and she had made many sacrifices, including leaving her daughters behind, and naturally all this hardship, okay, has made her into this person, and the hopes that she had for herself was, purely born from the kind of life that she had to live. And so now, here she was on a boat going to America, and she had this duck with her, and obviously this was something that was precious that she wanted to bring with her, probably to start her new life, something to remind her of the past, something that defined her somewhat. Okay, and so she came to America with that duck, but the immigration officers pulled the swan away. Well, obviously she wasn't allowed to bring it in to America, and so they took it away from her, not allowing her to keep it. But there she was, the way she described it. She said they pulled the swan away from her, leaving her fluttering her arms, which means, I think it was a sign of distress. Basically, she's completely distressed. But in all of that, she managed to save one feather. Okay, with only one feather, for a memory, she says. Memory of what? Memory of her life back home, the life she lived in the past, and all that life represented. Okay, so anyway, let's look at this little story. Okay, she knew she was going to start a new life in America, which, she did not cancel out the possibility of her starting a family and having kids. And it was somewhat like a promise to herself when she said she was going to present that feather to her child. Okay, it meant so much to her that it served as a gift for her child, just a feather from that swan. Now, if you were to think about it, if someone were to just give you a feather from a swan that the immigration officials took away, I don't know how much you will actually value that. But now that feather was not just any ordinary feather. To this mother, it meant a lot. It represented a lot. Okay? So now, what was so important about this story? What's so significant about that feather? Now, in this first section, Amy Tan actually covers two themes in the book. Okay, the first theme is actually a language barrier. Okay, and the second theme is the fear of losing their identities, their lives. So now, let's look at the first. Okay, now you see, the story begins with Jingmei talking about the Joy Luck Club. Okay, recalling stories told to her by her mother. Her mother's now passed on, so all she has are all these stories. Okay, and in that first part, Jingmei was asked by the aunties to go and meet her half-sisters who her mother managed to trace but did not manage to meet. And that initial shock that she got, that she had to go and meet her half-sisters and tell them about her mother, I think it was quite a daunting task, because she had to go and meet these people who has never met her mother before, and she had to tell them about her mother, their mother, and tell them about how they lived. So anyway, in that shock, she blurted that she didn't know about her mother. She said, "I didn't know." She says, "I don't know anything about my mother." Now, when she said that, something struck the other women. What was it? Basically, first of all, they couldn't even imagine that a daughter did not know her mother. But you see, this kind of opened them up to a possibility that maybe their daughters felt the same way about them. Their daughters probably did not know them as what they wanted their daughters to know them as. Okay, now what do I mean by this? You see, because of the language barrier, the mothers were never able to share their stories with their daughters. Okay? Now all of them had a story. We had Anmei, who was basically, Anmei was basically somewhat disowned by the mother, and she had to put up with her grandmother having to see her grandmother disown her own mother, and to live in this very unhappy family, blaming herself entirely for everything that's happened, and how she had a major scar, a physical scar and an emotional scar, to represent that childhood that she had, a very painful childhood. And then you had Lindo, who had to escape a child marriage, an arranged child marriage, to a person she could never ever see as a husband, whose mother-in-law constantly belittled her and blamed her for everything wrong, and she was miserable. And then you had Ying, who never had a chance to speak, because she was told to not open her mouth to say anything, or else she will lose what she had, and she had constantly had to live in the shadow of somebody else, to have to take their orders, to live the way they live, and she never had a preference. She couldn't even voice it out. And so all these things that they had to go through in their lives made them the way they were. But you see, they could never share this with their daughters. Why? Simply because their daughters could not understand. You see, when they came from China, they still spoke a lot of Chinese, and they hadn't really mastered the American English, which their daughters speak fluently, having grown up in America and having attended American school and surrounded by the American culture. So they could never really understand the ways of their mothers. You see, the mothers had their own beliefs. They had their own way of doing things, which they couldn't exactly explain to their daughters, or have their daughters take them seriously, even because it was so different. Okay, and now the thing is, because of the things they believe, because the things they say and the way they think, their daughters don't think very much of their mothers. they in fact didn't think that the mothers were very smart. Well, firstly, because they couldn't speak properly, but secondly, you see, when the mothers want to teach their daughters, they didn't have the right words. And so a lot of their lessons came in stories. Like, in order to teach them something, they would tell them a story. As Jingmei recalls, how the mother said that she had to exchange um, rice for pig's feet, and how the pig's feet became 6 eggs, and that went on and on. And so, to a little girl growing up in San Francisco, um, surrounded by this very American culture, that story seemed a little far-fetched, and they thought that their mothers were silly enough to think that they would understand these stories, or they would actually believe these stories, so which made them think that their mothers are really not very smart. But you see, all the only problem was the mothers had no idea how to explain these things to their daughters, and that was a major problem in their relationships, because they could not communicate, and the lack of communication made them perceive each other very differently. The daughters thought that their mothers were not very smart, and the mothers thought that their daughters do not want to have anything to do with the Chinese culture. And so they both kind of misunderstood each other. Okay? And growing up, they did make fun of the Joy Luck custom, the whole custom, the Joy Luck Club. And they made fun of superstitions, which was very much part of not just the Chinese, but I think in the Asian culture. And here, quoting Jinmei, she says, the superstitions were beliefs that conveniently fit the circumstances. Okay, so you can see that the girls don't think very much of their mothers. Okay, and this became a source of the main cause of a lot of frustration between the two. So now, why was it so important for the mothers to tell their daughters? Because you see, like any mother who wants to impart her knowledge to her children, these mothers were the same. They had this wealth of knowledge, and they just didn't know how to tell their daughters. Okay, and this was a major problem for them. Okay, it was important. It was really important for them. Now you see, going back to the lady on the boat. Now you see, she had that feather. Now why was that feather so important? That feather was the remnants of her past. It was the only proof that she had of that duck. If she was going to tell people about the duck that was so beautiful, that was too beautiful to eat, people, they may somewhat understand, but they may not know exactly how beautiful that swan was. They will not know why she's making such a big deal about that swan. But with that feather, she has proof of the existence of that duck. And so this is it. You see, why did she want that feather? So that she can tell her daughter about that swan. She can tell her daughter the stories of the past with proof, with that feather. So now you see, it was so important to her that her daughter knew of that bit of her past, which was the same with all the mothers. So now you see, whatever stories they had of themselves, these were the only remnants that they carried with them from their past lives. All the things they had to give up, all the things they had to sacrifice, all the things they had to go through, all this were just left in these stories. There is nothing left for them to show their daughters where they come from except through these stories. And that's why it was so important to them that their daughters understood their stories. So when Jingmei actually said that she didn't know anything about her mother, it was a problem. The mothers were afraid that their daughters also would not know them. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted for their stories to be remembered and their past to be remembered. All that they had gone through, they wanted that to be known so that their lives will not be forgotten. And that's why it was so important. Now this feather she kept with her, and at the end of the story she says, the feather may look worthless, but it comes from afar and carries with it all my good intentions, all her good intentions in that one feather. And she waited year after year for the day she could tell her daughter this in perfect American English. Now, why was it so important for her to tell her daughter in perfect American English? Because she wanted to speak a language that her daughter could understand, so that her daughter will know how important that feather was. Now remember, that feather is just a representation of her past. She wanted to be able to tell her daughter how about her past in a language that her daughter will understand, so that she will accept her, not just her, but accept her with all her past and everything that has made her the person she is. And then maybe the daughters will understand, when the mother reacts in a certain way, why she would do that. The mothers just wanted to be understood. They wanted their past to mean something. They wanted their past to mean something, not only for themselves but for their daughters, to remember their mothers and their lives to not be forgotten. So here we can see that the daughters only know their mothers as the people they are at home, like what they see, what they've known since the time they were small and they could understand. They know nothing about their mother's past. They know nothing about where their mothers come from and all the things they've gone through. But you see, the mothers have so much more depth than what the daughters know. And this is what the feather represents. That depth that the daughters cannot see, the depth in which all their mothers' fears, all their mothers' experiences, their the hardships, all the sacrifices, all that is represented by that feather. And that is the depth of their mothers, which the daughters do not know. And the mothers were afraid that their daughters will never know. And that is why they start recalling all these stories about their past. Because to the mothers, that was important. Okay, it was so important that Suyan actually waited to be able to say these things to the daughter in a language that she understood. So what we can see here is a parable that actually reflects all the stories that are within this section. Okay, this section is made up of 4 stories. The Joy Luck Club, Scar, the Red Candle, and that last story by Ying Ying, the Moon Lady. So you have these 4 stories, and they all represent this thing, the sacrifice, the giving up of themselves. And this is what is reflected in this story about the woman and the feather. Okay, so in the coming videos, we will look at the other sections and what the other parables mean.